Welcome to another one on one podcast edition. Today, we're going to be talking about what you want to do to set your tasks on fire. And for those of you who are wondering, what the heck does it mean to set your tasks on fire? I'm going to tell you, first of all, what that means to set your tasks on fire, why you need to do it if you have an ADHD brain, and how this can help you not only run a better business, but also run a leadership team that works better, how to build up a cadence for it. Now, as always, I am going on live on Instagram and on YouTube. So if you want to see some videos, you can find it there. Otherwise, this is a pre recorded podcast and you're listening to it. So thank you so much for doing that. Okay, let's jump into it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to why this idea of task initiation is such a struggle with ADHD. If you have an ADHD brain, what you will find is that you will really struggle to start tasks. You'll often find yourself going, I know this is urgent, but like, is it really urgent? And this can happen all the time. I actually just got off a call with the wonderful James Lachlan, and he was talking about this idea that if we have a task and for him it was keynote speaking. He had to do keynote speaking, super committed, loves keynote speaking, but actually going ahead and actually doing the job of making the slides and setting them up, that was a real struggle. That was a real struggle for him. And so what that meant was that he was putting it off until the day before, the day of, and obviously that wasn't great. This will happen to you all the time. There will be things that you love to do, things that are very important for you to do, that you won't do because you are in a position where you just don't have the dopamine for it. I'm going to take you through exactly why that happens. So, when we look at the research into ADHD and dopamine and how it works, what we find is that when it comes to people who are neurotypical, who have traditional brains, there seems to be, the research is still being figured out, but there seems to be a boost that they get at the start of doing a task. So, yes, there's a reward at the end of the task, but there's a little dopamine, brain boost that they get at the start of the task that goes, hey, there's going to be a reward at the end. This is going to feel great. Well done. Go ahead and do this. And then when you get to a place where you are, when you have a more unconventional brain, a more ADHD brain, what you see there is that people are going ahead and they're not getting that brain boost. They're actually getting the opposite. They're getting way less of a boost. And so they start a task and their brain goes, well, this is lame and this is particularly boring. I don't want to do this. And so that's one of the reasons we talk about the step into focus routine, which is how you can, go from this is too boring, this is too confusing, this is emotionally vulnerable to getting something done consistently. But once you've done that for those really big tasks, it is really nice to have something that's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more of a cadence that you can use regularly. That's essentially what we want to do today is show you how to do that. One of the ways that we do that is called, well, what I call setting your task on fire. So, what does it mean to go ahead and set your task on fire? Let me show you what that means. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and share my screen so that you can see this. So, if you're on YouTube, you can see what's going on. Okay, so when we're talking about setting your task on fire, what that means essentially is you have, if you think about, one of those old school cartoons where they have the wick and then on the other side of the wick is the explosion and somebody lights it over here and then eventually it's going to explode. You're going to have to do the thing. That's what we want to do. We want to set light the little fuse so that we're going to cause the explosion. So we're actually going to do the task. So I'll give you an example from my own life, and actually quite funny because this is really part of the podcast and why the podcast is what it is today. We can go through and we can say, for me it was I love reading, research papers. It's a part of what I've done. I'm a former academic, so that was really important to me to be able to read research papers. However, I wasn't always the best at doing it consistently. It's a little bit difficult to get into, it's a little bit boring to get into, but I need to do it in order to provide, you guys with the best research, the best information. So what I found myself doing was I actually went ahead and decided to create something, you might have heard of it, called the ADHD Skills Lab, where I was working on talking with somebody else about research, academic research, and I was doing it publicly. And I do that every couple of weeks. And so, what you'd see is, well, if I'm doing it every couple of weeks and I'm doing it publicly, that's a pretty big fire. I need to be prepared for that. I need to make sure that I'm ready for that particular task. That was me lighting the fuse. And nowadays, I get to do it with Will from the ADHD Skills Lab, which is so amazing. And so that has really, really helped me to set my task on fire. There's other things you can do. You might have some writing that you have to do, you might have some content creation that you have to do. These are all the different things that you might need to go ahead and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this if it's just me. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to need to actually set some kind of fire in my life, some kind of external accountability in my life that is going to help me to do this more effectively. And so when we talk about that idea, and I'm very curious for you guys what comes up, what are the kind of questions that you have about how to do this? For me personally, it's usually external accountability. It might be doing something publicly. One of the things you guys might, well, I guess I mentioned it at the beginning, know is that I don't just record myself, I actually go live. Why do I do that? Why do I go live? One of the reasons is because it creates a bit of external accountability. I know that you guys are here. I know that you guys are listening. And actually, I should probably go ahead and tell everyone that this is happening on a weekly basis so that people turn up if they want to listen to it live and ask me questions, because that way I can include a little bit more accountability. I'm sitting on a fire. I'm increasing the fire. Now, oh, people are coming. I'm going to be on time. All those kinds of things. So this is, another great example of this is sometimes people who want to clean their house will go ahead and invite people over because they know that they're going to tidy up before that person comes over. That's another example of setting a task on fire. In business, setting a task on fire could look like booking a client sales session. It could look like booking a meeting with your assistant. And we'll talk about that in a second because that's really, really important, so that you can review the metrics for the business and how it's been going. And all of those kinds of things are really great ways to set a task on fire. But what are the three main mistakes that people make when they think about, "Ooh, I have to increase the stakes on getting this task done so that I'm going to actually do it. I have to set this fuse so that I'm actually going to do this task." Number one, they set everything on fire. They go ahead and they say, "Oh, okay, let me go and let me, if I'm looking at my business, well, my delivery is not very good, and my acquisition isn't very good, and my Facebook ads aren't very good, and I should post a little more regularly on Instagram. I'm just going to go ahead and set this all on fire. I'm going to say I'm going to do this publicly, and I'm going to tell everyone I'm going to do this, and I'm going to hire this person, and next thing you know, there's just a ton of fires everywhere. We don't want to do that. We don't want to set everything on fire. That's not going to be very, very helpful. You want to pick the most important thing. And you'll probably have heard me talk. I talk about it all the time about this idea of what is the most important thing that you have to do. Your 80/20, that's what you want to focus on. So that is the thing that we really want to go ahead and figure out, is like, what is your most important first task? If you're in the Focus Balance Growth Program, that is exactly what we look at specifically. And if you're not, then you want to go ahead and you think about, what is the thing blocking you from adding revenue to your business right now? That's the thing you want to focus on the most. The second problem that people can have is putting the fire a little bit too close to the time. So if you say, okay, I want to kind of get myself to do something, you don't want to say, "I'll do it the night before," because you might as well not even bother at that point. So for me personally, when I was setting up The podcast, for example, well, I do my podcast research recaps with Will now. So we'll have a meeting after the previous podcast episode to talk about what the next two podcasts we want to do are. Then we'll set up the research side of it. And I'm pretty committed to going ahead and annotating and looking at the podcast information a couple of days in advance. So usually on a Monday for like a Wednesday or Thursday podcast episode. That's what we will do. So these are how we try and set things not too close. And am I perfect at this? No. I've definitely done the day before stuff, but trying as much as possible to make sure that the accountability and things you put in place are not too close in time is the second thing that you want to focus on. And the third thing you want to focus on is not making the fire hot enough. A lot of times people will say, well, Sky, I've tried this and it didn't work for me. And usually when I ask why it didn't work for them, they'll tell me a story about how they asked their friend or their parents or their relatives if they could hold them accountable. And they'll say, hey, could you just jump in and hold me accountable? Could you text me in the morning and just make sure I did this? I want to get up early. I want to work out, all of that kind of stuff. And they'll say, yeah, sure, no worries. I'll do that. And then what will happen, generally speaking, is that person will forget. Maybe they'll remember a couple of times. Maybe then they'll forget. Or even if they don't forget and they say, how did it go? You'll go, oh, it was difficult. This thing happened. It was a weird week. It was a weird day. Some of you have heard me talk about the weird week, weird day perspective in the past. And so it didn't, it didn't happen. And they'll go, hey, no worries. That's not really what we want. We want sort of the thing was happening. Everyone was seated. They were sat. They were ready for you. Where were you kind of level of, having a fire. So just remember, if you're asking people you don't really care, if, they don't care, you don't care, that's not going to provide you with the kind of accountability that you're looking for. Okay, so that's how do you set a task on fire? That's kind of the basics of setting it on fire and why you do it and what that looks like. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about how to do this in a business context or when you're working with a team, because this is a really crucial thing. The things that I teach are how to get your time back, how to focus, how to get your time back, how to grow consistent revenue in your business. One of the things when it comes to growing consistent revenue is we want to go ahead and create a cadence, something that we can do regularly when it comes to this. So if we think about that, I'm going to jump into a second video and a second drawing, which is actually just from this morning. I taught this in my community, so some of you might recognize this. But basically, this is my little cartoons. Love my cartoons always. The problem with doing it by ourselves, and the reason we need other people often when we're setting a task on fire, is we will sort of question if this is really a fire. And this will happen a lot, especially when we're in a position where we are not, how do I put this? We're not really feeling good about what we're doing. So for me, for example, let's say I commit. I say, okay, I'm going to go live every Tuesday at this particular time, and then I turn up, and then other people don't turn up. And surprisingly, that happens. And part of the reason is I'm not telling you guys that I'm doing it, which is something I'm going to commit to. So yeah, we're going to hold me accountable in this moment. So then it becomes a question of like, well, is this really important? Do I really have to do it today? Do I really have to do it now? You can find yourself kind of questioning it, especially if maybe a lot of people didn't respond to the last thing, or they didn't turn up, or you didn't get, you didn't get the outcome that you were looking for. ADHD, rejection sensitivity, self-criticism, and generally not wanting to do things that have a lot of dopamine, don't have a lot of dopamine in them, can all be a part of how we can kind of convince ourselves this isn't very necessary. So when we're working by ourselves, we'll sort of go, is this a fire? Is this important? Maybe, maybe not. And we can leave it at that. And that's where we get a lot of the inconsistency. And if you know about doing anything, you'll know that inconsistency can be a really, really big struggle in doing it and not doing it effectively. So then the other thing that we could do is we can bring another human person in. And that person could be an assistant. Highly, highly always recommend, if you can, the first hire in your business should be some kind of assistant For me, way before we could really afford it, honestly, I was hiring the wonderful Robin, who still works with us, for like 5 hours a week, some very, very minimal hours a week. And now she's part of our team and she's amazing. And she definitely works more than 5 hours a week. So bringing somebody else in to do some other piece that helps them go and say to you, hey, that's a fire. So if you bring someone in and you say your job is to set up the video, your job is to make the thumbnails, your job is to make sure the recording goes out or script whatever it is, that gives them the accountability so that your problem is now their problem and you guys are working on it together, which means that you're not there going, well, I feel bad today. I don't know if I should be doing this. Maybe this isn't the right thing. Somebody else is there being like, hey, my job is to make sure that you do it. We get it out. Could you get it to me by this date? They are not thinking about it in terms of your emotions, which can be very, very helpful because we can be very, very up and down with that kind of stuff. They're just like, this is a fire. We got to do it. It's got to be done by this date. Let's get it done. And that can be massively, massively, massively helpful. It's also one of the reasons that this podcast comes out all the time. It's because of the wonderful people that I work with. Then we get to the next stage. So that's the first idea. You bring someone on, you work with them, they say, hey, this is a task that you need to do by this date, which means this task is now on fire. Can we please get part A, B, and C of this task done? Thank you very much. And you're like, yeah, we can get that done. And suddenly you have a little bit of that external accountability, a little bit of that deadline pressure. We've set that task on fire, that task is moving. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And this is particularly good for tasks that really don't have a deadline. The next thing we want to do is we want to say, okay, well, what if we turn this into a repeat weekly meeting to present on what we've done? That's kind of next level. What if you and this person had a meeting weekly and you went through your wins for the week, the numbers that you wanted to go through? Maybe you have some metrics. Well, your job is to make sure the podcast goes out regularly, so that's your number. My job is to make sure sales happen regularly, so that's my number. And you went through and you talked through some of these numbers, and then you talked through the projects that had to do with these numbers, and then you talked through what can I do to be a better leader, and what can they do to be better at what they do. And some of these questions I didn't make them up. They're from the wonderful Matt Verlack from Precision. But this kind of system, this kind of structure, this kind of weekly cadence from an ADHD perspective, what that's allowing you to do is set a task on fire, make a task external, something that has dopamine, something that is happening consistently, something that has a deadline, which is what it means to set these kinds of things on fire. And it's happening weekly, and it's happening without you really having to think about it. You just know, before this meeting, I have to have this prepared, and so I have to be ready. And suddenly you've created a system that you're able to work consistently in. And that is a huge game changer for a lot of people who are solopreneurs working for themselves, because often it's that I'm doing this all by myself. And even if I hire somebody, there isn't a structure that we're all working in that can make it really difficult for you to build that consistent momentum. This is one of the ways we build that consistent revenue, not just when we feel good, essentially. And then the last thing, as always, don't set too many fires. Think of the people around you. Set too many fires, everything's on fire. And they're like, I don't know what to do. I want to help you, but I can't figure out how. And then they get overwhelmed and you get overwhelmed. So again, try and focus on one thing at a time. You want to go ahead and say, what is the thing that is stopping you from growing right now? That is the thing we want to set a fire around. That is the thing we want to set a deadline around and a process around. And that's what we want to focus on. Once that's good, once that's happening regularly and you're not worried about it too much, then we can go and set another fire. So hopefully this helped you. Hopefully this gives you a sense of what it looks like to set tasks on fire, and gives you a sense of what it takes to take something that essentially, businesses are entirely voluntary. Almost everything you do won't have a real deadline unless you make a real deadline. So it's about what will allow you to set those deadlines, make those things happen, and then make those things happen on a continuous basis, because we want to be here for a while. We want to be successful for a while, and that consistency is often what helps you become successful. So that's what we talked about today. So As always, my name is Sky. I help business owners with ADHD. So if you are a business owner struggling with your ADHD symptoms, you can always just click the link below, chat with me, and see if we're a good fit for what you do. See you later.